America were the ones responsible. Thus, as the new form of Black internationalism was taking place, Japan's triumph encouraged Blacks in the US to believe that victory by people of color in a global struggle against white supremacy was not only possible, but inevitable. It's then in the aftermath of the Japanese victory that Black commentators increasingly become aware of the efforts of Indian freedom fighters advocating for independence from British colonial rule. Comparison of the Blacks to the independence struggle in India expanded significantly. Proponents of this alliance viewed the African American struggle in the US as one against white supremacy in the form of segregation and disenfranchisement, while the Indian freedom fighters were engaged in a struggle against white supremacy in the form of British colonialism. One of the major propagators of this view in the United States was the Indian freedom fighter Lajpat Rai. He spent from 1914 to 1919 in the US and made a point of interacting with leading Black activists and intellectuals. As one of the founding members of Arya Samaj, Rai repudiated caste by birth and unequivocally condemned untouchability. The Black press also positively covered the struggles of the Gator Party, who attempted to organize a rebellion in India against the British Empire from California during World War I. The Gator Party was a democratic egalitarian organization that discouraged discussion of religion and sought to overcome caste, religious, and regional differences in South Asia. And as early as 1924, Mahatma Gandhi published a brief statement on the front page of the popular The Negro World, where the first line said, "Removal of the curse of untouchability among Hindus." Thus, Black leaders in the US came to also believe that the British were not interested in combating untouchability, only in weakening the Indian freedom movement by playing on different groups against each other. Thus, they believed in the argument that Indian independence would deliver a double victory, a win over white supremacy and untouchability. And the Black community was strong supporters of Indian independence throughout the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. In fact, the executive director of the NAACP, Walter White, seized upon the failure of the Cripps mission to press American politicians to form an alliance with Indian freedom fighters. He sought to use the concern about losing India to Japan as a reason for America to aggressively attack Jim Crow at home while arguing for India's independence abroad. As Walter White saw it, with America joining the Allies fighting against Hitler's Germany, Britain and the US were waging a war against white supremacy in the form of Aryan supremacy, and at the same time, the US practiced white supremacy in the form of segregation of Blacks, and the British practiced Anglo supremacy in the form of colonialism in India. In order to address this hypocrisy, White envisioned an American mission sent by President Roosevelt to lobby the British for Indian independence. Before the group left the US, Roosevelt would then take a strong stand against discrimination of color in the US. The mission then would urge Indian independence after the war as a way for the British to take a stand against Anglo supremacy. Now, while India's constitution included several provisions to attack untouchability after independence, what Dalits have learned is the same hard lesson that African Americans in the US have learned. Legal prohibitions against discrimination are only part of what is necessary to bring an end to oppression based on untouchability or race. So it is true that the close connection between Blacks and Indian leaders was lost during the Cold War. Nevertheless, those mystic bonds of friendship still align Blacks with all of those on the Indian subcontinent. Thus, African Americans find themselves in this contradictory position. We see South Asians as allies in the fight to make the US a more inclusive place, but we also see their failure to eliminate more of the consequences of untouchability as a breach of promise for our support for Indian independence. Thank you very much for listening.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor Brown, for that powerful and yeah, amazingly compact description of the building of international solidarity between Black communities and the struggle for caste abolition in India and or in South Asia. I feel like there is so much to unpack, but I just want to say I got chills multiple times throughout that. So with that, I think we will be moving into our question and answer session, at which point all of our panelists are invited to respond to questions. If anyone has any, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A chat box on Zoom, and if we have time, we will get to them. But I guess with that, I will read the first question that we got. So, it is often stated by some traditional Hindu scholars that the caste system, as originally envisioned, was not hierarchical nor discriminatory, but rather an articulation of divisions of labor, and it was not based on birth. It is further suggested that the discriminatory practice originated during the colonial era by the British. To what extent is this true? If true, is it a helpful narrative to advocate within the diaspora, as it might be more palatable to first generation South Asians or others in the South Asian community for whom the caste system is seen as central to cultural practices? Or should the system be more aggressively addressed in a manner akin to racial segregation in the United States? I think we alluded to some parts of this question, but I open it to the panelists for further discussion.
Well, I mean, I'll just take a stab at this because I've actually seen this line of thinking kind of, come up in different civil rights struggles, whether it's the California textbooks challenges, or even in some of the Santa Clara County work that's happened in the wake of caste as a tech, around caste and tech, and the, in that question. But in any case, I don't think we actually move the project of progress by catering to fragility. And this is a question that really is rooted in, we have a group of people that are uncomfortable with historical evidence fact. There is not a question that caste has its origins in religious scripture. It was birth-based without question. And we have centuries and also all of the other faiths that arose in the subcontinent, whether it was Jainism or Sikhism or Buddhism. These faiths were formed because of the challenges people were making to Brahmanism, the animating ideology behind the caste system. I say this as someone who was raised both Hindu and Christian. My dad was one of the founding members of the Malibu Temple in California. So I'm not saying this from a far distant location. I'm saying this internal to the religions that we all hold near and dear. And I think that so often caste oppressed peoples have had to wait for the comfort of caste privileged people before even an acknowledgement of the violence of what's happening. And I think that's not really served us in terms of the purpose of what we are really here for, which is equity and civil rights. And the reality is I think we just need to say what's happening, which is, regardless of whatever you feel the origin story of caste is here. It's a civil rights problem. We are seeing very severe consequences in American institutions, and we need policy to address it. If you want to have a separate liturgical religious conversation about what's happening with caste in your families and networks, by all means, please do so. But what we're here to do so is to talk about the legal issues that come up around this. And right now, if you're an institution where caste oppressed people are saying that they're facing hostile workplaces or unsafe classrooms, that's a problem. And the way that we address it is not with the history book, but with law. And we have 3 legal experts that say that we have international foundations, domestic foundations, and the moment is here, and I say, if you sense a little bit of frustration for me, it's because I think that I am no longer in a place where I can afford to have my people wait for the comfort of dominant caste people to be okay with us being seen as humans and us having equal protections under the law. I mean, I was really, I felt really like a very deep pain when I heard Smita say the rule of caste is stronger than the rule of law. Think about what it means for someone who is caste oppressed, who's lived that reality for centuries, to then see caste recreated in the diaspora. We have a social responsibility to do something different here in the diaspora. And I think, Professor Brown, the one thing I would add is not only are South Asians failing our covenant with African Americans around the commitment of what it meant for you to be allied with Indian independence, for us to eradicate untouchability, but also casteist mindset informs anti-Black mindsets. And the way South Asian communities show up around Black struggle is really informed with the way that we have learned to throw other people under the bus within whatever paradigm of hierarchy that we are a part of. And I think back to some of those early struggles related to immigration, where South Asians like, Bhagat Singh Thind or A.K. Mozumdar made the argument to be brown white people and supported miscegenation laws under those casteist mindsets. So the call of the action right here is not to go at the pace of fragility, but go at the pace of rights. And for us, all of us that are able to be able to move with empathy, move with love, acknowledge that there's discomfort, but then don't let the discomfort be the obstacle, let it be the door.
And I want to add to that too, because, and I don't want to take away from this conversation about discrimination based on untouchability, but as an African American who's defending all of these arguments against critical race theory, what we're watching is this amazing set of people who are basically arguing racial discrimination does not exist. Let's not look at history. Let's not look at anything. Let's act as if it is completely gone. And I understand the frustration that when the group is oppressed is trying to say, look, here is our oppression, it always runs into this counter story. Well, we don't really see it. Prove it to us, when it's something that really in some real sense is common sense and obvious to everyone who experiences it.
I'll jump in quickly on, I think, the latter part of the conversation around the economics of caste, which I think is what that question was also pointing to, is the rigidity of the division of labor and what purpose that serves. And to bring it back to Thenmori's presentation and to Guha's presentation, looking at how that might manifest today. If you look at caste as and human rights law has also talked about this category, not just of dissent, but work and dissent-based discrimination. And what makes caste unique is not only the imposition of untouchability and other really denigrating connotations on the basis of one's birth into an impure, so-called impure caste, but also involuntarily being assigned into specific occupational categories. Then when we talked about manual scavenging as one example, how that operates is it continues to maintain, I think, an enormous supply of cheap and even free and bonded labor to feed an economic system that relies on the exploitation of labor, and also why it might be very difficult why caste travels so much alongside employment-based discrimination, because not only is there the idea that certain caste communities are only worthy of certain occupations, but the idea of maintaining that strict category functions to support capitalism in very profound ways, right? So we talk about racial capitalism. I'm working right now on a piece thinking about caste capitalism and how it serves that. And you see that manifest in the IT companies, not only in who's denied a promotion, but also the ways in which merit cannot overcome these preconceived and very, very biased discriminatory notions of what communities deserve based on the caste in which they are born to. And conversely, the automatic merit and bump that's given to those who come from dominant categories, even if it's not earned via merit, because they are seen as more belonging to that. So I would just add how it really helps to entrench caste in much more contemporary ways and in market-based discrimination, including the United States, because of this idea of occupation and descent.
I might just add one thing. I think that there's a, before I went to law school, I studied Indian philosophy. And so I think there's a very difficult question when analyzing indigenous religions, archaic indigenous religions, about what constitutes the religious component that has survived till today, and what constitutes some other kind of component. And the separation between those things, I think, is difficult. And in understanding what is modern day Hinduism, in light of that, I think it's an extremely difficult question. I also think it's a personal question. What you think of as your religion, given a certain kind of history, is, I think that's a question that each person must reflect on themselves. And so I take to Thenmori's point that this is, you can have a liturgical religious question. It's a really important question that people have to, reckon with themselves in understanding what their religion is, or what their religious views or moral views are. And then we do something different when we analyze what the law is and how it rectifies very real discrimination that people are facing at the employment, at the workplace. And I think it's really important, as Thenmori was saying, not to let a certain kind of personal moral question that one must reckon with in understanding their religion impact the very real discrimination people have when they're at work, right? Or trying to find housing, trying to do the very common things of life and are facing inordinate obstacles to doing that. I think it's really important to keep those two things distinct, even though both are extremely important questions that we face.
And I would also just add, I've seen this in the chat, there are questions around, does the addition of caste take away from another protected category like that of religion? And having protected categories don't subtract from each other, right? This is, and I'm sure that the lawyers here can speak more to that. But some of the things that we're trying to remedy around the issue of caste as a protected category are serious things. Like, for example, I was just talking with this one company where, in their local offices in India, they had placed the meat of the canteen area next to the bathrooms, so it wouldn't pollute the vegetarians. Imagine having your food by the bathrooms. That's what's happening by this corporation. You're also hearing, people being, once people see Ambedkar on their computer screens, then people, and that's a giveaway that person is caste oppressed, or what have you. Social media, people starting to get discrimination and sexual harassment. These are serious problems. And when someone claims caste as a protected category, it basically leads to an HR investigation that addresses what is the mindset of the harm doer at that time. And so both the person who's the complainant can claim the category that they're looking at, and it gives an insight into the question. It's not like caste cancels race or caste cancels religion. But I think oftentimes when people bring that up, it's like a bad faith argument to shut down the real need for, the extension of civil rights protections that are required for caste oppressed people to get remedy right now. Because even though, and I think Professor Guha and Professor Brown and Smita talked about this, caste is covered under multiple existing categories, where it's discrimination on descent or, ancestry, country of origin, sometimes faith, depending on the context. But the reasons why we're asking for it to be made explicit is because we want to be able to address the fact that most people who are caste oppressed are not reporting because it's not listed. So they think that their complaint will not be addressed. And, to give you an example, someone I know who worked for a big tech company's sister, company that they had hired outsourced work to in India, when they made a complaint about HR issues related to caste, they were told that, they didn't have a sense of humor, that this was not a thing, and for them to get back to work, even though it was a very, under the POA Act, it would have been seen as a slur in the Indian context, and it wasn't being implemented. So it's serious, and, there was another question in there about the Equality Lab survey being discredited. And I just want to say, again, that is another caste bigot talking point. And I want to just address this straight on. When we did this survey at the time in 2006, no other institution in the United States was prepared to do this. In fact, organizations that wanted to, that we approached to even deploy the caste survey, they went into existential crisis to even have a public discourse around caste. Like this one organization said they had to convene their board about whether or not it was appropriate to send their members this survey, because they were worried about doing this survey, like it would actually divide their community. And I had to share with them, your community is already divided. Many of your members that are Dalit are not out because they do not feel like it's a safe space. We need to be able to break the silence on this issue. And on the issue of this Carnegie report, again, and the entire research team is dominant caste. They had several flaws around how they even talked about caste. For example, they only asked the people that said that they were Hindu whether or not caste existed in their community. And as we know, first of all, caste exists across all South Asian communities, but also quite crucially across all religions. So for example, with the work with UC Davis, one of the reasons why UC Davis was so keen to add caste as a protected category is some of the largest groups of students that were talking about caste discrimination were caste oppressed Sikh and Ravadasya students experiencing casteism from other dominant caste Sikh students. We have big blinders when we are not really addressing the fact of how interfaith that this problem is. And the Carnegie study does none of that. And they neither consulted a single Dalit civil rights organization in the inquiry of their work related to caste. So I actually, have a lot of things that I would say about that caste data that they developed. And I think what's more important rather than discrediting a survey that's identified a problem that we've now seen laid out by many American institutions, is we need to focus on getting more data. And we need to focus on building the legal cases for being able to push forth the civil rights change that we need, because discrediting Dalit institutions and leaders is actually part of the gaslighting and the bigotry and the problem. And it's something that Smita knows very well, because in terms of her work at Human Rights Watch, every single step that Smita and the Dalit leaders that she was working with to establish caste as an international category was met with the same kind of gaslighting, was met with the same kind of refusal to recognize the stories and the data of Dalit peoples. And I think we just have to say, we know that there's going to be pushback. Who cares? We are people of courage and we're people of conscience, and we can do better.
Thank you so much, Mori, and thank you everyone for your answers to not only the question that was asked, but a couple of questions that were posed in the chat as well. I think unquestionably this is an issue that is so interlinked, not just legally, but with so many aspects of our lives, as all of the panelists have spoken at length about. And I think just really staying true to making the space and opening the forums where necessary, and doing the work of really introspecting within ourselves to find out where that privilege lives and where we can step back and listen to what, especially Dalit, Bahujan, and Adivasi activists have been saying, not just, for the last few years, but for centuries, I think is a really useful first step for all of us, but then also drawing from this immense body of knowledge, diverse and varied knowledge that all of our panelists and many more scholars have presented. So a huge thanks to all of you for answering those questions, and a huge thanks to our participants for providing the questions and for engaging with this conversation. With that, I would like to turn this over for our closing remarks to Then Mori, and just once more say a big thank you to everyone for this incredible conversation.
Oh, hey, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I'm just really honored. It's been such a historical effort for us to be able to pull this conversation together. And as we see, the movement for caste civil rights is one that's like, not just decades old, but goes back to the fighting of the first abolitionist struggle in North America, which is that of, Black people trying to get free. And I think that to know that there has been, movement solidarities across race and caste that informed our current legal precedent that allows us to move in this moment around caste civil rights, it's really a powerful thing to stand here with Saba and be able to open this conversation at a national scale within all of our communities. And so we look forward to being able to build with you all. And, again, for folks that want to try to find more about our work, you can find us on our socials at equalitylabs.org. There are also several fundraisers that we'd like to highlight. In fact, we'll drop there's a fundraiser for the workers who are part of the BAPS Temple case that APALA, the Asian and Pacific Islander arm of the AFL-CIO, has been fundraising to help with resettlement and work for those workers that are bravely fighting for their rights. But also we want to hear from other SUBA members that want to get involved in the struggles related to caste equity. So if you have an idea that you'd like to be able to work with groups that are working around caste civil rights, or perhaps your council who's thinking that you might want to bring caste as a protected category to your institution, SUBA and Equality Labs and all of the legal experts here are really here to help. And we really hope that the next time we have this conversation in SUBA, we have even more organizations that have added caste as a protected category. Because again, even though we're in a time of deep crisis, it is also a moment of deep opportunity. And anything that I've seen in terms of organizing is that the darkest moments are the moments where we can really show up and be the lights that we need, the lights that our next generation needs to be. And so I thank you all for coming together and look forward to seeing you guys at the next conversation. JB, and see you all soon.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for sitting through what was probably one of the most inspirational and most eloquent, frankly, webinars that Saba has ever had. Thank you so much for our special featured speaker, Thenmari Soundarajan, as well as all our panelists, Guha Krishnamurthy, Kevin Brown, and Smitha Narula. Very thankful as well as to the ABA's Civil Rights and Social Justice section, as well as the Brooklyn Braga Massive. And a special thanks to Amita Vempati, as well as Lakshmi Gopal, who helped assist in putting this program together. Again, unfortunately, some of the program did not record, and for that I have to apologize on behalf of Saba. That was a mistake on my part, but we have had many requests for the slides from the presentation. So hopefully Thenmari would be willing to share it with Saba, and we can share it with the organization through other methods. And we have some parts of the recording. So with that deepest apology, I'll note that this is probably the best program we could have started 2022 with. And once again, thanks to all of those who participated in the program and those who attended. Thank you very much.